Przed nami kolejne wystąpienie. Przed nami artysta wizualny, który przyjechał prosto z Wiednia, Jascha Süss. To artysta cyfrowy, który tworzy w oparciu o narzędzia generatywne. Mieszka w Wiedniu, tworzy bardzo wiele przedsięwzięć na potrzeby występów na żywo i festiwali, a temat jego wystąpienia to wartość eksperymentu.
Every discovery begins with an experiment. An idea without a clear outcome, but enough curiosity to carry it forward. I discovered the art form of live visuals 10 years ago in a local nightclub near my hometown. And back at that time, I had no idea where it would take me one day. My name is Jascha Süss, and today I would like to tell a story about the value of the experiment. 2015, a good friend of mine introduced me to the art form of live visuals. We created these visuals in a local nightclub using self-constructed styrofoam boards, creating our own stage designs, and projecting onto them with our home projectors. We created the content in Cinema 4D, and we played these visuals using Resolume Arena. And this was all a new world to me, and it was really exciting, really fascinating. Every weekend, we would build a new stage design. We would experiment with different materials. And I didn't really see it as an art form back then, but more of a form of expression. And to play to the music and kind of improvise. And it was just really fascinating. Also, once in a while, we created these events where it was called All Eyes on Visuals, and we had some more like special setups, like this kind of 360 degrees setup. But it was all very kind of do-it-yourself character and just like a room for experimentation, right? And to get better in Cinema 4D, to create some more interesting content, I got into creating these kind of daily artworks. I would create an artwork every day using Cinema 4D and post it on Instagram. For me, this was kind of an experiment to just learn and progress, but also just to have some output and to keep myself doing something every single day. And the experiment is a very important factor in my art, because oftentimes when I start out, I don't really know where it's going to go. I just trust the process, and in the process, I believe that you can discover things that you couldn't even have thought of before. As I like to say sometimes, something new cannot always be imagined. Sometimes it has to be discovered. And I didn't have a clear goal with these dailies, but very soon they would have very real consequences. Now, one day, the Austrian DJ duo Kruder Dorfmeister approached me, and they said they saw my work on Instagram and they love it, and they wanted to ask if I could imagine creating a show for them. And that was for me like unbelievable. I was really excited, and of course I said yes. The goal was to create a show for the Philharmonic Hall in Berlin. Now, this was a very special venue because it's this classical concert hall with the seated venue. And so it was just that more exciting because there was so much attention and focus on the visuals because it was a seated show, right? And the crazy thing is we had 1 month to produce the entire show. So my colleague and me, we got right into it, and day and night we started working on this show. And we experimented with different types of media. We did some things with filming water drops, for example, projecting into them, and creating these kind of very organic artworks with also microscopic films, but then also with some very complex real-time simulations using Notch and TouchDesigner. And in fact, we wanted the whole show to be, aside from those abstract filmed footage, we wanted to be a generative show, all created in real time. So we built our own complete user interface inside of TouchDesigner to play this whole show with real-time content generated in TouchDesigner or in Notch. So in this whole process, we learned not only on how to create these visuals, but also how to build an interface. What is it actually that we want to have to control in the moment, to control to the music? And it was just a very interesting process, a great learning process as well. And in the end, the show went great. And it was a great kickoff with these artists. We had a great show using these visuals that we could play all to the music. It was a very calm set as well because of the special setting in the Philharmonic Hall. But in the end, this experiment worked out very well and was a great success. And it was also a big milestone for us because it was the first show in another country, and the artists also loved it. And after that, they asked if I want to go on an America tour with them. And of course, I said yes. And while we were in the middle of producing this new show for the US tour, a certain COVID-19 pandemic came and everything was shut down. And that was it. There was no tour, no shows, no visuals. Everything shut down. And in that moment, I knew it was time to get back to one thing, the experiment. Now, because Kruder Dorfmeister had time, since there was no tour, they had time to produce some new music in the studio. In fact, I should say old music, because they rediscovered some old cassettes that they had produced in the 90s, and they released it as an album called 1995 with tracks from back in that time. And for the release, we wanted to do something special, but because there was no events, we wanted to try something different, something that would work online. Now, in that time, there was this platform called Mozilla Hubs, which was this kind of virtual reality-based, browser-based platform where you could meet with other people and be inside of these virtual 3D worlds. Now, the interesting thing about Hubs is that the audio is spatial, so you actually have to move to people in order to hear them, which makes the whole experience very realistic in one way, but then also because it's browser-based, you're very limited in terms of the resolution and the kind of amount of objects that you can create. But my idea was, what if we create an album as a 3D experience where every song of the album would have its own room that you can get into, and then you could listen and experience this music and be in this kind of 3D world according to the music. And it was a very interesting way to think about music instead of this linear and visual way that we are used to, but in a more spatial way. Now, again, because it's all browser-based, you're very limited in terms of the resources that you can create and what you can do. So you have to reduce everything to its minimum. But at the same time, limitations are always a great thing for the creative process, because once you have your boundaries, then you can really explore them and work inside of a certain framework. And that just makes you more creative. And so in this case, we created these rooms for every single room. You can see it's very kind of this low poly optic, but in a sense, it's also very fitting to this music that's back from the 90s. So in a sense, that was also kind of fitting. But it was just a very interesting experiment. And then we had this launch party where people from all over the world would join. And we also had this kind of meet and greet sessions with the artists themselves, so you could meet them and come say hi. And it was an interesting experiment, an experiment that would probably not work outside of this context of the pandemic. But at the same time, in this time frame, it was also a very interesting era to experiment with completely different forms of mediums. But once the pandemic went away, it was back to get to the real thing, real experiences, real music, visuals that come in the moment and go in the moment. And I had the great honor, again with Kruder Dorfmeister, to play on the Vienna Festwochen. We did a projection mapping on the town hall of Vienna. It was a very exciting project. We played on at some very iconic venues like Printworks in London. We finally went on the America tour. We went to Burning Man. So we really went to places that I could never dreamed of playing one day, and it was a great honor. And in fact, recently, they went on a new tour, bringing back the K&D Sessions, their classic album from the 90s, as a live show with a band. And for this, again, we wanted to create something new. And because this was a completely new setting with a band, and it was, again, in these kind of concert halls that had a 360 seating situation, we wanted to create something that would work from all the angles. I said, it doesn't make sense to put an LED wall in there because you're only going to see it from certain angles, and we need something that works from all sides. And at the same time, we have the band standing in a circle. So we need something that works in a 360-degree way. And so this was kind of a very rough first sketch of what we wanted to create. We had this array. I wanted to do this show on a pixel matrix, on a three-dimensional matrix of LEDs, to have this kind of hologram show, if you want to call it that way, or this 360-degree show that would work equally from every single angle of the audience. And then as a little funny, as a stage design, we decided to use over 500 sunflowers, because that's just a reference or an homage to this album cover that was photographed in a sunflower field. And so we wanted to use this as a sort of homage to that. And it would also be an interesting combination of this kind of futuristic, monolithic element in the air and then the natural elements on the ground. Once again, I had no idea on how to actually create this, but I had the confidence that we could do it on time for the show, and it would be a very interesting experiment once again. So I ordered one of these matrices from China, of these arrays, and I learned on how to actually control them. At first, I learned it using Resolume, so in a two-dimensional way, just copying one video layer onto all of the layers of the matrix. And then finally, after like a week of experimenting, I also learned on how to use it using TouchDesigner and control it in a three-dimensional way to actually display some volumetric 3D content. That was really a kind of breakthrough for me, and that was when the whole fun could start of creating the content. Once again, this was a very limited this approach of limiting yourself to a certain resolution. I mean, this is way less resolution than you would usually have on a video wall. But once again, this kind of makes you think in completely new ways and gets you even more creative in terms of working in this confined space and seeing how you can use this medium. And this is always kind of the approach that I love to take, is explore different types of media and different mediums and see what is kind of the essence. When you go to the core of it, what makes this medium special that you can't do with any other medium? And in the end, I think we really explored it in an interesting way. We had some great fun with some different techniques. We had the final rehearsals in the studio in Vienna from the rental company, and then we went on tour. Now, for the actual event, we didn't use this matrix from China. It was not really production ready, in my opinion, but we will use these SGM balls instead, which are usually hung in this kind of curtain. And we just decided to hang them in a pre-rigged in this three-dimensional array. And in the end, it looked like this. We had the kickoff show in Hamburg in the Philharmonic Hall, and it was a great success and a lot of fun playing this show live. And in fact, I used the same TouchDesigner patch that I created for the first show in the Philharmonic in Berlin. I just reproduced the content and different content for the 3D matrix, but with the same interface. So it's always nice when you can kind of build upon the things that you have built before and reuse them in the future. And now, while Kruder Dorfmeister made it possible to play in these beautiful concert halls and venues across the world, my roots were always in this kind of club culture, subculture, and especially drum and bass, because that was kind of the music that was playing that club that I told you about before. And so when the Austrian drum and bass duo Camo and Crooked approached me, I was really excited to work with them. Very recently, they launched a new music label called Modus, and the goal was for me to create the artworks for the new releases on the label. And this was a very interesting task, because you always have to think of these in terms of art and design. They have a very functional way of working because they have to be cover artworks, and then we wanted to create animated assets for all of the promotional outputs like social media, YouTube, and then as well they should be visuals for the live shows. So you have to think of it in a way, okay, it has to work as a visual, it has to work as a promotional asset, but it also has to be a very interesting experimental artwork, right? And so for the most part, I decided to stick into this kind of approach of using single individual objects that are kind of evolving in a way, always on black space, on negative space, just because that is something that works very well in visuals, right? If you have objects floating kind of in midair, or in empty space, then it makes them stand out even more if you lose kind of the frame of the video wall, right? And so that was the approach for most of the artworks, and it was a very interesting challenge for every single one of them. And fun experiment, once again. In 2002, they hosted the Modus Label Night, featuring different artists and music from their label. And for this show, we wanted to create a nice kickoff and some special little feature for the show. And one thing that I like to do is to create a lot from little. And by that, I mean using minimal tools in the production, but then get the most out of it in terms of the concept and the content. And one thing that really fascinated me was laser mapping, using a laser to project onto an LED wall, and then synchronizing the lasers with the video to kind of create this interaction between the two mediums. And it was just an interesting approach to think of the two-dimensional surface of the video wall extended in the three-dimensional space, and to see on how you could explore this kind of technique and what you could do with that. And so I started experimenting and prototyping with a projector and a laser from the rental company that we would work with, and experiment with different ways on how we could synchronize them using either timecode or clips that would loop. I created most of the content in Cinema 4D using the plugin for Beyond to export from Cinema 4D to the laser, and then allow me to create these kind of interactions. And again, the most simple approaches are the most effective ones most of the time, right? Like just using a single point or a line that sort of acts as either a light source in the 3D space or as a sort of impact point. And we really had some fun messing around with different concepts here, like from very aesthetic ones like this one, but then also more like some fun elements, right? Like we had this, I'll show you in this video later, we had some elements in the show where you just don't take it too seriously. I think that's an important aspect for me as well, oftentimes, not to take everything too seriously and to have some humoristic elements in the show as well, just to kind of loosen it up a bit. And so this was one of those elements, for example, the space invaders that we would shoot with the lasers and just mess around a little bit, right? We had some cats with laser eyes, and then some classic stuff, like the outline of the logos. But in the end, it worked really nicely, and we had these different approaches. We had this laser on the truss at front of house, and then just a single widescreen in the back. And then playing around with different concepts here. We also created this kind of intro show. In the end, for most of the clips, we used timecode to synchronize the two of them, and for some of them, we created loops that would actually send the video from Beyond to Resolume, and then we had to figure out the offset. It was quite some interesting challenges there, but fun experiment. And this was one of the cool ones, I think, where we had this kind of impact on the asteroids, shooting them with the laser. In the end, it worked out quite nicely. The only problem was that the haze, once the venue started filling up, the ventilation got so strong that the haze would get lost in the crowd a bit, and it worked best on stage. But other than that, it was a really nice end result, I think. And then, very recently, I also became part of another production, and that is Afterlife. Now, Afterlife is a techno label that in the recent years has become very popular, especially because of the massive productions and the very strong use of visuals. And the interesting aspect about Afterlife is that it's not just a single studio or a single artist creating the content, but it's a kind of curational process on working with artists from all over the world, digital artists from all over the world, and curating the visuals that will be played for the show. So it's really this very, very interesting process of creating a very great variety of visuals, collaborating with different artists, and literally giving them one of the biggest stages you can imagine, right? And also the cool thing with Afterlife is that you will have these very planned and like moments that are very concepted and precisely timed, right? But then the rest of the evening, you would also have a lot of room for experimentation and some more abstract visuals. For example, this one that we played in real time with TouchDesigner. So even for a production of this size, we experiment with new techniques, new technology, or different techniques on what we can use to sort of improvise as well. And that's just very interesting approach, I think, for this production. And so in the last year, we were on tour through South America, North America, Asia, Europe, and very recently there was a show in a very special venue, and that was the Sphere in Las Vegas. And on 15,000 square meters of LED screen, digital art and visuals literally get the biggest stage you could possibly imagine. And experiencing this venue in real life was absolutely mind-blowing. I can't even describe it, and no video can make it justice because it's so overwhelming, literally. And it was so inspiring for the future of the implications of all of this. And so if there's one thing that I learned along the way is that the future of visuals is not just created by new technologies, but the courage to experiment with them. It doesn't matter if it's with styrofoam boards in the club, with a pixel matrix in the Philharmonic, or with 15,000 square meters of LED screen in Las Vegas. It's always about the same goal: to create new spaces for connection, emotion, and new experiences. Because in the end, that's the true value of the experiment. Not just what it produces, but where it takes us, and what it makes possible along the way. Thank you very much.